Uh, Andrew.
Good morning.
Andrew, good afternoon. What time you are in UK at the moment?
UK, yes, it's 10:47 at the minute AM. Yes.
Okay, so have a good morning there to you. Thank you for joining us. We are running 15 minutes late. Yeah, we will try to see how can we manage the program, but you don't have to curtail your presentation. Andrew will be talking about innovative approaches to stakeholder engagement in strategy development. So that is something which is very, very important and people don't talk about it. So let me give a quick introduction to Andrew. So Andrew Constable is a seasoned senior leader renowned for his expertise in navigating critical strategic challenges and opportunities, ensuring organizations stay ahead of competition. With a dedicated focus on creating a winning business models, crafting a customer-centric value propositions, and developing comprehensive business strategies. Andrew offers invaluable guidance to drive organizational success. His proficiency extends to implementing OKRs, balance scorecards, and empowering teams to execute strategies effectively and achieve desired results. This is exactly what we are looking for you to hear you, Andrew. So over to you. I know you have many things to say. Yeah. Please proceed.
No problem at all. Okay. So tell me, can you see my slides?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
So you have a company, Visualize, right?
Yes,
Visualize.
totally right. So I'm just going to go into the slides now. So
Yep.
yeah, thank you everyone for thank you for the panel for inviting me along to speak today. So like we just said, I'm going to be speaking about the topic of innovative approaches to stakeholder management in the strategy development and execution space. And really, this is crucial for today's dynamic business environment. So we're going to explore some different approaches to this stakeholder management, but through the lens of open strategy. And open strategy really emphasizes that transparency, that inclusivity, and collaboration, which enables organizations to harness those different perspectives and insights from various stakeholders. So just a bit about me before I move into the next area. So as you just said, so I'm a director at a business called Visualize Solutions in the UK. And our main focus is really on strategy formulation, execution, and innovation, mainly business model innovation. And, I have a lot of experience in the different spaces that I've worked in and qualifications across the field. So just, do follow me on LinkedIn as well. And I do post every day pretty much about these sort of topics. So that'd be really great if people would join. I'm also the co-author of 2 books, which are on the screen, called Online Innovation and Hybrid Innovation, which is in Japanese. But I'm also, like I said, the director of Visualize Solutions. And check that out, check us out. So let's get going actually in the presentation and let's think about why we're here and what we're going to talk about. So the first thing we need to think about is this statement: nobody knows your strategy. And this was done by MIT, a report published by MIT in 2018. And it said that nearly half of the organization's top leadership cannot clearly articulate the company's strategic priorities. And this statistic's quite interesting because it's a critical issue for organizations, because as you can see here, if you look at the top line of the top team, only around 50% of top team senior leaders, C-level leaders, can actually understand what the strategic priorities are, which is actually really quite worrying. But as you start going down into the organization and looking at these different levels, you can see it starts dropping and dropping and dropping as we go down. And if we look at the front line leadership, we're talking around about 13% of employees in organizations actually understand what the strategy of the organization is. So this is quite kind of a worrying sort of situation, and it's also something that I've seen in practice as well with consulting and working with organizations, that it's definitely something which, depending on the size of the business, mid to large organizations, it gets worse as you see this. And one of the reasons for this is, in my view anyway, the execution or strategy development and execution is really a people problem. It's not a strategy problem. And research really indicates that 90% of organizations fail to execute strategy successfully. And this can actually stem from senior leaders dedicating lots of time crafting strategic plans in isolation. So we all know senior leaders get together for a retreat for 2 to 3 days, they build their strategic plans, and then they go and communicate to the organization. So what happens there is that strategy is then imposed on the organization. And this can lead to that lack of commitment, which is crucial for different stakeholders across the business. Because these people are the implementers. These are the people who are actually going to be doing the actual work. And we all know that strategy is done down at the individual level. Without people doing it individually, it's never going to happen. So this disconnect between planning and execution really highlights the need for a much more inclusive approach to strategy development, ensuring that all levels of the organization are engaged and invested early in the process. And how many people have we seen when you've presented your strategic plans or your objectives to various employees in the organization, and they have an expression on the face like that? And this vagueness, it just trickles down, like I said, looking at that first slide I shown, it trickles down through the hierarchy of the organization and it intensifies. And this can lead to that misaligned workforce, which is disconnected from the company's goals. And like I said, we've all seen this. We've all seen team members who say, yes, I understand what the strategy is. I understand where we're going as a business. But then they go leave the meeting or leave the Zoom call or whatever platform we use, and they are completely confused. So we need to think about what are the problems with the lack of stakeholder engagement. So, like we said, the world's changed. In the previous presentation, there was lots of talk about Brexit in the UK, where I'm based, the general election, which starts next month, and also there's some big impacts from COVID and such like. And, that basically means that the world is very much changing all the time. And these organizations can encounter these challenges that can hinder their growth and their performance. But if we look into the internal perspective of the organization and think about some of the employees and such like, those type of stakeholders, we could have a low buy-in from stakeholders. We can have a resistance to change, which happens a lot across organizations. And this can stifle innovation and adaptability across the organization. It can also lead to missed opportunities and overlooked insights, which can really prevent the business from capitalizing on different growth areas. And that's really important because one of the things, what a lot of thought leaders in the space, they talk about how we need to engage frontline staff into some processes, to strategy process, to be able to get weak signals from the market and get it really from the pulse of the frontline employees to really inform their strategy process. But we also think about ineffective implementation as well of strategies. It kind of lacks that why why are we doing what we're doing? Okay, which then leads into that original first thought with we have a low buy-in and we have a high resistance to change. And like I said, addressing these challenges really requires a more comprehensive approach. We need to ensure that all our stakeholders are aligned, engaged, and those insights are leveraged to help us with a more effective and impactful change throughout our organization. Because we don't really want to be into the position of this where everyone's called onto a call. We're in a call on a Friday afternoon and the CEO's communicating the strategy to the business and everyone's disconnected. Everyone's fed up with listening to it. And that is not great for future long-term involvement with the business and buy-in from stakeholders. So this was a quote, which I can't remember who said this, but it's something I quite like. It's making strategy behind closed doors is a prescription for failure. And there's a number of reasons for that. Because if an executive board is only people creating the strategy of the organization, you've really got that problem of limited viewpoints from across the organization. You have a lot of groupthink as well in that room. So really successful strategy formulation and execution requires that transparent approach, that collaboration approach, and also that inclusive approach as well when it comes to developing your strategies as a business as you move forward. Because again, we do not want to have this impression of our employees and our managers who have to go and deliver this. So one way we can think about it is flipping this on its head and involving stakeholders right from the start of the process. And we can do this by fostering that more open environment where ideas are more freely exchanged and tested. And organizations can create strategies that are not only more aligned with the business actual needs and realities, but also have greater buy-in from those executing them. So this more inclusive approach is something we call more of an open strategy approach. And I think this is a really important statement as well, that commitment arises from empowerment, not just passed on by authority. So when we're empowered, individuals take ownership of their roles and their responsibilities, which leads to more genuine and really important, it leads to more intrinsic commitments. Okay, so they're really motivated from within. And this sense of ownership really fosters that proactive and engaged attitude instead of that more mere compliance that authority really just enforces. So we have to think about empowering these team members and leaders to cultivate that environment where commitment is naturally developed and sustained. It's not artificial, it's naturally developed, which ultimately leads that organization towards the goals of their strategy in a more effective manner. Because we all want to be pushing and going in the right direction. So by engaging our employees, our customers, our partners, and other stakeholders, we can bring people on the journey early and use them as part of this process. So one of the things we can do, we can explore this topic called open strategy, which allows us to generate new ideas and to mobilize everyone around them. So the question would be next, what is open strategy? So open strategies is really an approach that emphasizes openness and exclusivity. It invites collaborations and feedback from various stakeholders. And this contrasts with traditional strategy development, which is, like I said, is typically confined to a small group of senior executives within the organization. Open strategy really covers three main areas. And they're really categorized by that transparency approach, inclusiveness of different stakeholders, and also getting your stakeholders to actually be part of that process. And it's really gained ground over the last few years, because as we know, especially since the COVID issues and everyone deciding, we're working from home and things are changing in the world, we've gone, the workforce in certain areas and certain countries has really gone from working for a living to more working for a purpose. So there has to be a better connection with the organization, and they want to, employees want to be part of the future of that organization. And a lot of employees won't work for organizations but don't align with their own purpose. So this is some of the things we have to think about as we move forward. But if we think about transparency in this, transparency ensures that we have that strategic goals and processes are visible. And that visibility builds trust and it builds accountability. And if we go to make an inclusive environment, that invites different diverse voices and ideas. And those diverse ideas and voices can really drive and enrich that strategic conversation and also drive innovation within the organization, because you're taking different viewpoints from different areas across the business. And you can also then combine some of those different ideas, different viewpoints, and you can start thinking about how is this going to help us shape the organization as we move forward. And that participation really empowers those stakeholders to contribute actively. And it helps us have those more well-informed conversations. And it's supported early by the employees of the organization, which hopefully allows us to get greater buy-in when we actually go and execute some of these strategies as we move forward. So really this open strategy approach really talks about this transforming strategy development from this executive exercise into that dynamic organization world endeavor, which drives sustainable success for organizations. So if we look at this diagram here, and this is from openstrategy.info. If we look at that, we can look at different innovative solutions and drive sustainable growth by engaging those broad range of stakeholders. But we need to do this on more of a gradual shift from a closed to an open approach. So if we look at this diagram on the screen, we can see in the bottom left-hand corner, you have this closed approach to strategy, which is very much where we look at the traditionalist viewpoint of strategy. But really, in the future, we want to be starting moving towards the top right-hand corner, where we start thinking about developing that fully open approach to strategy. But like we said, we can't really go just from a completely closed environment to a completely open environment, because that's a massive cultural change in the organization. So we can look at ways of actually trying to have an intermediate step in the middle here, where we can start bringing in new ways of opening up the strategy by using certain techniques and certain methods, which allows us to do more of a step change within the organization. And this really, like I said, this ensures that those strategic initiatives and strategic ideas are more aligned with the needs and the expectations of the market and customers, because you're taking the pulse of the customer and the market as you move forward. So there is a quite nice little tool, which hopefully you can see on that, and you will get the slides afterwards. And this was taken out of Harvard Business Review. And this is really the open strategy decision tree, and it helps organizations open up their strategy process to other stakeholders. It's also covered in the open strategy book, which I showed a minute ago and I'll introduce later on. And this allows you to start breaking where does your strategic scope fit into? Is it a strategic idea? Is it a strategic formulation process that you're going into, or is it a strategic execution? And then you can go through different steps on here. You can start thinking about the different areas and the different directions that you can go. And then at the bottom, to help you, you have a set of tools. And those tools will allow you to start opening up this process. And I am going to be showing you some tools in a bit where you can start thinking about and start implementing some of these as you move forward. So I definitely recommend that you check out that book and also that article on open strategy as well. So if we contrast that, like we said, with these closed approach to strategies, the more traditional approach, it does, like I've said already, it sort of limits that closed approach limits the diversity of perspectives. It heightens that risk of groupthink. Okay, everyone thinks the same. And it also diminishes the overall quality of strategic decisions. This also requires much more buy-in from the different stakeholder groups, where they start to feel excluded and less committed to the implementation of that strategy. The limited communication can also lead to misunderstandings about the strategy. And that goes back to the first slide I shown, where almost 50% or around 50% of the top managers at C-level in the organizations couldn't name the strategic priorities of their business. And like I said, as you go further down the organization, it gets worse and worse. And because they don't understand the various strategic priorities, that develops that resistance and that lack of alignment. So, like I said, we need to widen the amount of voices we get and the communication methods that we've got throughout the development process of strategy, which then aids us and helps us as we move forward into execution. So again, this is another interesting way of looking at it. Holding strategy at a closed environment isn't helping organizations, it's killing organizations. And we've seen how many organizations are changing over the years and how a very successful organization over the years is now maybe an organization which is on the back foot, which is losing ground or going under. And this can come from various reasons. And one of the ones you can think about is the focus. A lot of businesses, organizations focus on mimicking successful practices of industry leaders. So they go out and they benchmark and they adopt almost identical processes and products, business models, where they're going to compete. But all that really does is turn them into more of a Me Too business, exactly the same as every other competitor in the space. And this is also very much minimizes risk as well. But we also have things like bias strategies, where we have preconceived notions and personal preferences. We may have people on the strategic team who have been part of the business for a long time. So they've always got those preconceived ideas about where they should compete and how they should compete in the market and such like. So this can lead to those suboptimal decision-making and really the misalignment as well with those market realities, potentially sort of harming the business's competitive position as they move forward. But a key thing we need to think before we start opening up the strategy and we start thinking about, okay, how are we actually going to do this? We need to understand, the first question is, we need to understand who are your stakeholders. And there's different ways we can think about stakeholders as we move forward. So we can break it down into just two broad categories at this stage, and we can say who's internal and who's external. And when we look at a stakeholder, these are normally individuals or groups who are interested in the company's activities. So internal could be employees, it could be managers, it could be executives, shareholders, board of directors, or external. It could be customers, suppliers, investors, different agencies, like government agencies who potentially have input into what the organization's doing, regulatory agencies, and community groups, which are getting more and more prevalent in certain markets. So we need to think about who are they before we start thinking about opening this all up. And a way to do that, a simple way to do it, is just to use something like a 2x2 matrix, which if there's a lot of consultants on the call, you will know this one, and you'll also know that most consultants like to use a 2x2 matrix. But when we map our stakeholders out, this allows us to identify, categorize, and prioritize those stakeholders by thinking about what's the level of interest they're going to have, and also what kind of influence are they going to have over some of the things we're thinking about. So we can also think about this by visualizing those stakeholder relationships, and we can ensure that those key players are engaged and the different communication channels are set up for different parts of the business depending on what's required. And this allows us to have a much more proactive approach to managing stakeholders and how we work. So, as I said, this is really about, if you understand who your stakeholders are, you can then start tailoring towards their expectations and those contributions that they're going to make to your business strategy as you move forward. So an example simple framework you can use, and obviously this is a simple framework, there's a lot more in-depth frameworks you could use, is you could look at just things like, first of all, you could start by clearly defining the scope of what you're trying to do. And this is really a foundational steps, but it helps determine which stakeholders are going to be relevant to the process. Then you can identify those stakeholders like I've just shown you. And then you can go into the analyze step. You can ask key questions. You can go, who's going to have the power and the interest in the organization, or different customers, or different regulatory boards, or someone like that. So you can think about this as you move forward. You can create some sort of diagram as well, where you show the interconnectivity of different stakeholders. And then you can think about how you're going to engage different stakeholders across the business in this process. And that could be things like basic things like we do anyway in organizations, things like surveying, interviews, focus groups, workshops, to try and gain more insights and more perspectives. So really this allows us to have that clear communication channels, which allows us to keep our stakeholders informed and involved throughout that process. And this really helps us then drive that effective engagement, which ensures that we have buy-in and support for our strategy as an organization. So let's show you some techniques and some ways that we think about this and how we can use approaches from open strategy to engage stakeholders right from the start. So if we look at the first one here, crowdsource strategy ideas, new ways that you're going to compete in the market. Think about how you can leverage that collective intelligence of that broad group of stakeholders to generate different solution ideas and insights from across the business, and also from across customers, suppliers, and such like. This approach really taps into those diverse perspectives and the expertise of those employees, suppliers, etc. And a great example of this is Barclays, which is the Barclays Bank, which used something called the Strategy Jam to really make that transition from the traditional retail banks to a more digital first bank. Because again, patterns change. High street banks, certainly in the Western world, are closing. Everyone's moving online. So they successfully embrace this digital transformation by engaging their workforce in developing new strategies. And if we look at the actual process, again, this has been taken from openstrategy.info. We think about different things as we move forward, different stages. So we start by setting those clear goals. Okay, so what are we thinking about when we do this? We then identify different work streams. Then we can go into building something like a forum. We could use a web forum as an example. And that allows us to facilitate discussion. And it allows us to start cramming together and gaining these different ideas. So we think about it almost like a conference. But as we move forward, and after the strategy jam, we can also then analyze that collected data, communicate how that's going to potentially change things, and then we can start building that into our strategic process as we move forward by using the crowd to help us as we move forward. Okay. So if we think about another example, is the transparent formulation of strategy. And this is really about how can we share things like drafts or strategic plans with stakeholders and get their feedback. And this openness really allows those stakeholders to understand the company's direction and contribute to different insights. Again, starting to foster that collaborative approach to strategy development. A good example of this is Buffer, which is the social media management company, which is renowned for that transparent culture. And what they do, they share their strategic plans, financials, company metrics openly, not just with employees, but with customers and with the public. And this can start building that trust and create that much more inclusive, engaged community. And because, again, the customers, as an example, are more bought in to the strategy of the organization, they start having almost like an emotional connection to the brand. And we see that with a lot of organizations when the crowd is more committed to the brand as we move forward. So again, this is something we could think about when we actually do this. Could you share your ideas, your strategic plans that you're developing, or your scope of your strategic plan? Could you start sharing that with various channels? Could you think about sharing it with various customers, with various partners early in the process? And then you've got others. You've got things like co-creation workshops. And a lot of these open strategy techniques are similar to open innovation techniques that we use. Very similar as you think about this. But again, co-creation, can you sort of think about holding workshops which are dynamic and collaborative across a diverse unit of stakeholders to start gaining those insights? And the great thing about a co-creation workshop is that you actually are getting people together who then can share that knowledge together across the different areas. They can start coming up with different creative ideas, and then you can start mashing those ideas together to start helping you think about new ways of competing in the market. And a good example of this is Lego. So they have something called the Ideas platform. And this platform allows Lego fans and customers to submit different designs, different requirements. And then the community can vote on their favorite submissions. So this approach has really led to a lot of successful products for Lego. But more importantly, it's also strengthened that relationship with the community. And again, it's created that emotional connection to Lego as a brand. But it's also helped that co-creation process. It's also helped them to foster innovation, different ways of thinking, and engagement across the business. And it's also fun as well, as you can see on that picture there, building our Lego and thinking about how we can do things differently. All these different areas is very, very interesting as well. A more traditional approach, which a lot of you probably already do anyway, but it's a very interesting approach, is advisory boards. So again, these can be really good at sort of thinking about getting diverse perspectives and guidance. And these boards really comprise of representatives from various stakeholder groups. And the secret here is not to have everyone on the board, on the advisory board, who's exactly the same as your organization. Try to have a spread of different people. Again, think about those stakeholders I introduced earlier. Think about customers, partners, employees, experts, and various other things. Also bring in maybe, depending on what you do in your organization, bring in people you would never bring into this conversation. What about futurists? Who are going to be looking, quite a long time in the future. What about, if you're an old traditional company, what about bringing in some young new employees who have joined the organization to share their understanding about the way things are changing? Like a reverse mentorship type thing where you start taking the younger person's view. And a good example of this is Patagonia, which really thinks about this. They do it across their business, but one of the areas they really do this on is their environmental strategy areas. And for this, they bring in people like experts, consultants in the space, scientists, activist groups as well. And this allows them to continuously advise Patagonia on their sustainability strategies and those initiatives, and really allows them to enhance their sustainability efforts and building that commitment as well to more social responsible organization. So again, such boards really ensure that there is a diverse viewpoint are considered, leading to that much more holistic view and effective decision making across how the business performs. So again, it's quite common advisory boards. That's not a new thing, but it's something a lot of people forget about. Bring people together in the room and start developing your ideas, but make sure it's diverse when you do this. And then we think about other things, social media or engagement. Think about engagement strategies. So think about how you can leverage things like social media to gain those inputs, to gain suggestions, to gain feedback from the wider market. This approach really uses those social media's widespread sort of networks across the world. Pretty much everyone's on social media somewhere. And it's also great because it's interactive. So you can have interactive nature with that broad audience. A good successful example of this is Dell. So they've developed a platform which is called IdeaStorm, which is an online platform where customers can submit ideas, they can give suggestions and give feedback on Dell products and Dell services and new value propositions that they can deliver within their strategy. And if we look at this, is a screenshot of the previous idea storm that they ran, or quite an old one now because it's an old screenshot. But it really, again, it improves that whole environment of that sense of community and that involvement among stakeholders. And you can see on here, as an example, if you look at the middle part of the screenshot, it's contributed over 5,000 ideas, over 25,000 or 24,000 comments have been made. So just think of all the potential rich insights you can gain from those comments. And could you mine some of those comments to try and drive some great insights that you can pull into your strategy formulation as you move forward? And then we've got some others. This is the last one I'm going to show today on this. But if we think about here, this is a very big one, open data analytics. So this is crucial, to empower different stakeholder groups by, sharing relevant data sets to the wider markets and such like. So this approach really enhances that transparency again. and it enables different stakeholders to make much more informed and constructive feedback and decisions. A prime example of this is in the UK, and the UK has something called the Open Data Initiative, which grants public access to various government data sets. And this initiative really allows citizens, researchers, and businesses to analyze the data and to offer those valuable insights and feedback that can shape and improve the policies and the strategies going forward. So by embracing open data, and as we go forward into the future as well, with AI and how AI is starting to take over a lot of things now, data is only going to become even better as we move forward, and it's only going to become even more valuable to organizations. So by embracing that open data, we can start mining those insights, and we can start making more collaborative and informed decision making as we move forward. So there's lots of different areas we can think about with data, but just a couple here. We think about big data. That's been everywhere for years now. That crowdsourced data, and then the open data. And can we think about how we can overlap those as we move forward? But some of the things we need to think about is we need to think about, can we start small when we start engaging stakeholders in what we're trying to do? Okay, remember I showed you that diagram earlier where you move from the bottom left-hand corner to the top right-hand corner. That's a gradual change. You don't make the change all in one go because it will generally fall over. So we need to think about small steps. We need to think about different ways we could maybe open up our strategy as a business. And this is not an exhaustive list at all. This is just some ideas. But we could think about, how could we visualize, as an example, how could we visualize the different relationships that we have across the business? Okay, how can we communicate the vision about why we're going to open up the strategy of the organization? How can we communicate that? How can we get leader endorsement? Okay, how can we communicate that to our teams? How can we have communication channels set up? Can we have open meetings like town hall meetings, which a lot of organizations use? Or could we have inclusive forums, leveraging technology, which help us to make suggestions about across the organization? So really, employees become empowered, and they start feeling that they're actually part of the organization, and they're not just working for a living, they're actually potentially working for a purpose which is potentially aligned with the organization. And when we empower those individuals, we have to give them feedback. We have to take their feedback as well. So let's sort of think about, could we establish feedback loops across the organization? And can we celebrate wins that we've got as an organization, and also learn from failures? Because like anything, this is not going to work from day one. You're going to have to iterate through the process to improve it. And all of this, like we said, can be improved and can be facilitated by leveraging technology. But as I said, iterating is important. So we need to monitor and adjust it as we move forward. And we need to continuously seek improvement. Like you do with any management method, you're always going to be thinking about, how can we make this better? So a key statement, again, which goes through the whole of this, in my view anyway, is that commitment comes from empowerment. It doesn't just get passed down from authority. When we're empowered, individuals take those ownerships of their roles and responsibility, leading to that real, genuine commitment. And this sense of ownership can foster that proactive and engaged attitude as we move forward. So let's think about how we can empower team members, leaders to cultivate that environment where commitment is more naturally developed and sustained. ultimately and hopefully driving the organization forward to bigger and better things as you move forward. So just to wrap up, again, open strategy. So it's all about thinking about transparency, inclusiveness, and participation in strategy development. And by engaging those diverse group of stakeholders, organizations can develop much more innovative, well-rounded, and practical strategies. And by encouraging that adoption of open strategy involves that leveraging that collective intelligence through things like crowdsourcing, which taps into a vast pool of knowledge and creativity from outside the organization. But also think about how you could use technology to do a lot of this using some sort of engagement platform. You know, even simple engagement like social media is still an engagement way of doing something. So think about how you can get feedback from your employees, how they can make suggestions from multiple perspectives, which hopefully will lead to that more robust and adaptable strategic plan as you move forward. So, as I said, this was an overview of some of the things you can think about quickly and what it actually is. Recommended book. I didn't write this book, but it's a great book to read if you've not read it already. And it came out last year, I think. Open Strategy. Goes into a lot of detail talking about the different case studies and how you can implement this in your organization. But for me, the really key part of this whole thing is that the workforce is changing now. We're not just working for a living, we're working for purpose. How can you connect the individuals more tightly and closely to what you're doing as an organization? And one of the great ways to do that is to bring them into the conversation early and throughout the process. So just lastly for me, as I said, love to connect with as many people as possible on LinkedIn. Give me a shout. And yeah, fantastic. And that's everything for me. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Wonderful lecture. I like a couple of points what you said. Hoarding strategy is not helping, and it's killing companies. That's really a great point. Okay, that's really you said in one line everything, basically. Yeah. Okay. You said the matrix, like external stakeholders and internal stakeholders. You do some kind of matrix, and you have a plan. And one more point, what you said is very important. People are not working for money anymore. People are working for purpose. Now, in this environment, aligning stakeholders to the organizational strategy is one of the most important things. Okay. So because at the end of the day, the strategy is executed by people. It's not by machines. It's by people. So you have to get them aligned. And managing their stakeholder expectations right from the strategy formulation to the strategy planning process and strategy execution. Maybe it's like ongoing process. So what do you advise? Like, do we need to pay a special attention to stakeholder management as part of your strategy reviews, like what you do in month-on-month basis? So what do you in real time? How do you do that, Andrew?
Yeah, I think it starts for me right at the first point I made, that you need to understand who you actually are, your stakeholders across the business, because otherwise, if you don't understand that, you know, is it employees? Obviously, employees are important. Is it going to be partners, customers? Then it's very hard to manage and bring them into the conversation. So for me, that starts with that understanding each stakeholder, but then also thinking about, okay, so how can we then engage those stakeholders over the process? Is there certain methods we can use to engage them? Because one communication method or way of gaining feedback from one type of stakeholders is going to be different to another. You know, and there'll be certain people where you're going to be very much that crowdsourcing ideas, where they don't really want to be in a meeting or having a conversation with people. They just want to submit it online. And then other people would want to be part of those advisory boards, as an example. They will want to sit, have meetings, discuss, be really part of it. So for me, it comes down to that. Understand who your stakeholders are, understand how you're going to communicate with those and what their needs of communication are, and then devise a way of bringing them into the conversation. And I think it's also going back to some of the other conversations which we've heard today. You know, think of reviews. You know, how are you performing on your strategic review? As you know, Alan probably mentioned it on his balanced scorecard this conversation, but you need to bring in those strategy review meetings across the organization, and you can bring diverse people into those meetings as well of how you're moving forward. Yeah, I think that's the important thing for me. It starts with the basics. Understand who your actual stakeholders are. Without that, you're kind of guessing.
Great. So what I infer is, so you prepare a stakeholders list properly, okay, and then of course you need to have a communication plan with them.
Yes.
Of course, how you want to communicate, and also this stakeholder list will also be helpful for you to manage change.
Yes.
To manage change. So who is really okay with the change, and if they have any skeptics, or if you have any resistance, so how do you do more communication? So this is exactly, it's a change management, and of course the culture plays a key role here.
Huge.
The change management and the stakeholder management, and then communication, strategy communication, all these three things together will help organizations to make strategy execution very successful.
Yeah, and it's we all know everyone's on this call probably knows that strategy is not simple, is it? It doesn't have to, it can be sometimes fairly simple to think about where you're going to focus, but actually doing it is not easy. The execution is the difficult part, because strategy is at an individual level, isn't it? We need to think about who's on the ground and who's going to do this.
You are totally right. I always tell this point, by the way. So if a particular domain is very easy to understand, it does not mean it's not. It's very easy to do it. Okay. So strategy management is very easy to understand. If you read a book, you understand. But when you do it, you really see what it takes. It's unlike a software programming. If you learning is difficult, but once you learn, you can do it very easily. Okay. So strategy management, anybody can talk about it very easily, but those who are real hands-on, who have done multiple cycles and experience in successes and failures only can understand better, not like any other domain.
Yeah.
So,
I agree, and I think we all know as well that every organization is different. So you have we have a strategy process that we all implement, and every consultant or every business probably has their own process and how they do it, but you do have to adapt it towards the organization as well. But you make sure that you stick to the underlying principles of what you're trying to achieve, and why. And that's the important thing as well, is why are you trying to achieve what you're trying to do? Otherwise, not only will you end up going back to that first slide I shown, you'll end up losing your executive board. You'll also lose your employees as well. So always focus on that. Why are you doing something, and why is it important, and how can you bring it to the conversation?
Yeah, and definitely we will. I would like to read the Open Strategy book. Okay, I have it in my list. Definitely, in the course of, I'll try to read it. Yeah. So thank you, Andrew. We will compile the questions. If there is any questions, we'll write to you offline, and then maybe you can connect them and answer it, whatever possible. Okay. So thank you for your time, and have a good day and enjoy.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.